So hello and welcome back to Art of Science. My name is Graham Ambrose, your host here on Art of Science. And Art of Science is a quarterly interview podcast that coincides with each issue of the Policy Studies Journal. And as a reminder before we get started, so please rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. Today I'm very excited to have Mariana Costa Silveira with us. She's a postdoc researcher, and I am going to apologize because I'm going to mess this up. So please help me out in EDOP at University de Louisiana. Is that correct? Close? Close enough?
Yes, Université de Lausanne, it's perfect.
Close enough. I'll take it as close enough. Um, And she published a paper with Dr. Nusam Cohen, who's a professor of public administration and policy at the University of Haifa, and Dr. Gabriela Lota, who's an associate professor in public administration in Sao Paulo School of Business. In the August issue of PSJ, they published a paper entitled Are Bureaucrats' Interactions with Politicians Linked to the Bureaucrats' Policy Entrepreneurship Tendencies? And at a high level, the authors argue that bureaucrats also engage in policy entrepreneurship as a means for promoting both goals and fostering change. And they sought to identify factors influencing bureaucrats in engaging such behaviors. While the authors explore these factors, they also discuss this politics administration divide and argue what the desirability of policy entrepreneurship is amongst bureaucrats. So first of all, thank you very much for being with us today. And to start off, would you be willing to kind of dig into your paper a little bit deeper for us?
So, hello, thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's really nice to have this opportunity to talk and to talk more about the paper. So, if we have like to sum if we summarize the paper and the main ideas of the paper, um, we 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 tried to bridge some gaps in the literature of policy entrepreneurship among bureaucrats, which is a field that has been developed in the last years, but we have several possible venues to further extend this type of research. And we attempt to bridge one of this gap by assessing the relations between bureaucrats' interactions with different players in the policy arenas and bureaucrats' sense of self-efficacy towards policy entrepreneurship. And by self-efficacy, we mean to what extent the bureaucrat feels confident, like having the skills or having the capacities to engage in policy entrepreneurship practices. And by policy entrepreneurship practices, we mean when bureaucrats engage in actions aimed at foster a policy change, aiming to influence the policy design. And so this was the broad picture. And what saying very quickly, what we found is that when bureaucrats have more interactions with congressmen, as well as other actors in the policy arena, such as the media or the press, unions, and their peers, they have higher levels of self-efficacy about engaging policy entrepreneurship practices. And we also found different patterns, different relational profiles among these bureaucrats. So we have identified the brokers, the insiders, and the loaners, based on their interactions with these different actors. And finally, another important thing that we found was that we investigated bureaucrats' values and intentions underlying policy entrepreneurship attitudes. And we found that both social value orientations and self-interest motivations play a role in these dynamics, in this behavior. So we found this was interesting too. We can discuss more about this later on.
Great. I appreciate it a lot. And one of multiple things that you brought up there, but the first that I want to kind of dig into is the paper kind of places itself in between representative bureaucracy as well as the public service motivation. Could you talk about kind of identifying that gap and then placing kind of this research project within that gap?
Yes. So let's say I will start with public service motivation. We know that there is a lot that has been produced on this topic, on this very important topic. And what we tried to do was, okay, we know that civil servants, that people that work in public administrations, they tend to have higher levels of uh, commitment with public values, at least in certain organizations, or depending on the place the person works. We know, for instance, that in Brazil certain policy domains are
Mhm.
very, have a strong reputation of the level of civil servants commitment with the agent's mission, with citizens needs, and broadly speaking, with public service motivation uh, concepts. For instance, the environmental policy sector, or particular certain social agencies and things like this. But what we attempt to do in this paper, and to dialogue with the recent discussions between self-interests versus pu- public commitment with public values, and things like this, we, with this data, we were disentangling a little bit this conundrum to say, look, sometimes it's how can I say, it's we can see that some logics are can coexist, right? And particularly when we relate this to other findings from qualitative research, we see that civil servants, okay, they can have great social values commitment, but they also deserve a good working environment. They also want to grow in their professional careers. Everyone does, or tends to want this type of things, right? So we found this, and the particularly the statement that was in the survey was, um, I will find it here. So it was the first one was, the motivation was to have a positive impact on people's lives and society, which was more related to public service motivation. And the other statement was to achieve a higher position due to my performance. And this is something that we also discuss in the paper, is that when you are in a higher position within the organization, you have a broader space for discretion, to work with autonomy. And once you have more autonomy in the decision making process, you can also make a greater impact in policy entrepreneurship practices. You can have more influence. So these things came together, and for us, considering also the qualitative inputs from other researchers, we from other research works, we found it very consistent with our findings. And considering the representative bureaucracy, we did not enter too much on this, because we don't have like enough data to make certain claims. But for us, it was interesting to see, for instance, when you look to the data and look the disclaimers about, for instance, when bureaucrats try to comply, to be responsive to citizen needs and take decisions based on citizen needs, and as well as on policy evidence, this talks a lot about representative bureaucracy. So we have implications for this. I think that would be the aspect that I would highlight in terms of representative bureaucracy.
Wonderful. I appreciate it a lot. And I just to kind of follow up on something that you brought up, I enjoyed this conversation about these not street level bureaucrats, but these kind of middle level bureaucrats too, right? And what that meant for autonomy. But you get into the paper about, you know, really being able to leverage networks at that point. And as somebody that's not super familiar with this space, it was really enjoyable to kind of see in the paper you, as a group, kind of talking through that components and the logic. It was really wonderful. Um, Another thing that you brought up that I'm really curious about is your identification of these different profiles, right? So thinking about brokers, thinking about insiders, and thinking about loners. Um, just for the people listening, I was curious if you could just explain those, but also, um, was that from the beginning? Was that kind of something you were looking into, or is that something that emerged over time? Can you just like talk about the process of those profiles coming up in the research?
Great. I think this is a great question because gives me the opportunity to talk more about the review process, which was
Mm,
really great. So the first thing about the network, just to say this, and I think this is uh, great to also to mention, is about, let's say that Gabriela, Professor Gabriela's work and also my work in previous research work, we have done network analysis, the sociograms and everything. We have studied networks of both state actors and non-state actors that were implementing a certain policy. And we came across these middle level bureaucrats which have like a very key role in translating decisions from above, but
mm,
also channeling decisions from street level bureaucrats upwards. So there is this, they are in a very strategic position within public administration because they can have access to information from different sides of the policy process or different arenas within the policy process. And these previous works on studying the influence of the networks for the implementation process or for the decision making process was something that at a certain level influenced our the way we looked to the data for this project, for this article. And talking about the profiles, we and I will take it very, like, I will take the description to be more clear here in the paper. But how we came across this, it was not an idea that was in the beginning of the paper. In the beginning, we just wanted to assess the the association between bureaucrats' interactions with
mhm,
the actors and bureaucrats' attitudes towards policy entrepreneurship. But then, after the first round of review, um, we have received a comment from one of the reviewers. I don't know who he is, but I thank you very much, this person, for this idea. So the reviewer was saying, look, is this pattern something that is for the entire
mm,
sample, or do you have some kind of heterogeneity in your data? And we were looking, let's investigate because we have no idea about this. And then we conducted a cluster analysis to understand the different relational patterns for each individual in
mhm,
the sample. And we have identified these three different clusters, which are the brokers, then the insiders, and the third group is the loaners. So the brokers, they are bureaucrats primarily engaged in frequent interactions both within and outside the organization, both with both state and non-state actors. So they are, as the name indicates, they are brokers. And the second profile consists of the insiders, bureaucrats that are primarily engaged in frequent interactions within the organization, mainly with their peers, their colleagues, state actors. And the third one, that we called loners, consist of bureaucrats with a lower relational profile, so they interact less on average, and they are primarily engaged in fewer interactions both within and outside the organization, as well as with state and non-state actors. And then we had these three different profiles, and we conducted the regression analysis again, considering these subsamples to assess to what extent the interactions with politicians or with the media or with peers would be relevant for each type of bureaucratic profile or bureaucratic relational profile. And what we found was that the interaction with peers was the estimated coefficient was significant for all the samples. So peers was the interaction with peers was something that mattered for everyone. And the for the brokers profile, it was the only group that the interactions with politicians, with congressmen, that was statistically significant. So this enabled us also to think about the meaning of these results, right? So we are talking, we are not talking about a causal relationship. We are just talking about an association here, meaning that if a bureaucrat from this broker profile has more interactions with congressmen, okay, they can have more access to information, to opportunities, to knowledge, but it could be also the other way around, right? It could be a bureaucrat that is already strongly committed to a certain cause, that is actively seeking for a congressman to, advocate for policy ideas and to say, look, here is this policy solution for this problem, let's move forward with this and that. So it they by separating the sample in these different relational profiles, it was useful for us also to think about the possible dynamics underlying these results.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it's interesting to hear that it's something that's added in the paper, um, because it sounds like it also coincides with the network results that you had gotten in other studies. So I'm just curious, like, could you talk a little bit about that? I know this is kind of k-means driven from the data, but kind of how does that work with that other research that you're doing?
Great. So Uh, during previous research, both research that I did during my master's and also Professor Gabriela did during her PhD work. So we studied the influence of these networks, and in her case, she studied to what extent bureaucrats with different networks, individual networks, uh, how this will shape the practices of these bureaucrats. And she was studying street level bureaucrats in health policies, and depending on the type of the network of the bureaucrat, this type of network would influence the way the bureaucrat will interact with the citizen, and the way we say it's styles of interaction. So she studied this, and it was interesting because she also identified different relational patterns and different forms of behavior among bureaucrats. So it was really, really interesting. And in my case, what I did with networks was I studied bureaucrats that were strongly committed to foster policy change, and so it was a kind of a policy entrepreneurship practice. And then I studied when bureaucrats are in different structures of networks, of community implementation networks. They will be able to do different strategies of policy entrepreneurship depending on the position they are in the network. So I assessed, for instance, the practices of middle-level bureaucrats and street-level bureaucrats, and if they were in positions in which they have like um, a higher number of higher levels of connections with other actors in the network, if they were like brokers,
Sure.
they have also more conditions to navigate the challenges of the implementation of the policies. So this was the way that I analyzed the networks. And another interesting thing that also can add to this discussion that is more related to my PhD dissertation. Um, I didn't do network analysis in the dissertation, but I conducted a survey experiment with bureaucrats working in the environmental sector. And I investigated situations of misalignment between the agency's mission and the political superior's will or political agenda of these agencies, and what bureaucrats would do when there is this situation of misalignment, right? Will they follow their political superior's will even if this will is inconsistent or misalignment with the mission of the agency? What will they do? And then I randomized in the survey, I call it different forms of organizational support. And when bureaucrats could rely on the support of their peers, they were more likely to comply with the mission of the agency, even facing like situations of threats from their political superiors. And they were more likely to engage in these decent practices that I call by informal means when they had the support of their peers. And when I randomized other forms of organizational support, something like professional associations support that relates, in this case of the paper, to the unions.
Mhm.
Um, Bureaucrats are more likely to engage in decent practices that are aligned with the agency's mission, but with using formal means like accountable and transparent means. So it was interesting to see the impact of different types of organizational support, like peers in comparison with professional associations, and to see the different impact these forms of relational support or organizational support, the different impact these forms have on bureaucrats' attitudes and behavior. So sorry that I went to other paths here, but everything was so connected that I end up talking too much.
No, I think this is great. And it actually leads into my next question, right? So, because there's this big profile of research that is hanging together, but slightly different in each of these papers or ideas, I'm curious where the idea for this paper came from out of that kind of bigger portfolio of research.
So the idea for the paper in this case, it's not a very beautiful story.
I feel
uh,
like they rarely are beautiful stories. So
Sorry.
I said I feel like there very rarely are beautiful stories. So there's nothing wrong with that.
Because sometimes the person has the idea and then go looking for collecting the data and everything, like the person starts from the scratch. This was not the case of this paper. In the case of this paper, it was something like uh, we had an opportunity to collaborate with Professor Nissim Cohen from Haifa's University, and we knew from since the beginning that his research agenda was policy entrepreneurship, which was a topic that was also my topic. But Professor Nissim Cohen, he is how can I say, um, he has like very important works in this topic, so he was a very important reference for me.
Mhm.
And when we started this collaboration, we looked in Brazil. When I was in Brazil, we looked uh, for survey data that was available that we could use to study these topics that we were interested about. And then we came across this survey data, which was already available, publicly available, from ENAP, Escola Nacional de Administração Pública, is the national school for civil servants in Brazil. And so the data was there. And it was very interesting because the statements of the questions that the survey relied on, they were perfectly matching with Professor Nissim Cohen's book. And when he saw the statements, he was like, this is unbelievable. This is not true. Because everything was really matching with the statements, and it was not something that the survey cited Nissim Cohen's work. It was something that just happened like this. And so we decided to use the questions that were coherent with the measures that he has created some years ago, that are in his book on policy entrepreneurship at the street level. And then we decided to assess this relation, that this question that is in the title of the studies, is uh, if there is an association between politicians and bureaucrats' interactions with policy entrepreneurship tendencies.
Mhm.
So we did a preliminary data analysis, and in Nissim Cohen's head, he was already very focused in assessing politicians, bureaucrats' interactions, because of the classical discussions we have in political science and public administration about the role of bureaucrats and all the conflicts that goes when we talk about bureaucracy and politics. So he was very interested in looking this. So we did a preliminary analysis, conducted the regression analysis, and we saw this pattern. But we were also interested in seeing these interactions between bureaucrats and other
Mhm.
actors in the policy arena, because we know that all these state and non-state actors are relevant for the policy process. So we we continued to do this analysis, and once we saw the results, we were talking and thinking out loud something like, okay, we see that there is this pattern, but what about the implications of this pattern, right? Because there is a discussion about like the negative sides, or the other sides of bureaucrats being very involved in the policy process, and if they are self-interested, and all the harms it can cause for democracy, for instance. So we were we engaged ourselves in the second step of the work by assessing, okay, but what are the motivations underlying their actions, right? So this led us to the second regression model specification that we did, in which our dependent variable is still the same one. So bureaucrats' self-efficacy towards policy entrepreneurship practices, and our independent variables are beyond the control variables, but they are the bureaucrats' perceptions about these different motivations and their focus on doing their work on a daily basis, right? And then we saw this second pattern that I mentioned before, that we have like coexisting logics, and we recognized by the results of this data that, okay, we bureaucrats, in this case bureaucrats committed to policy entrepreneurship practices, they are they have a social value orientation, so they are focusing on promoting the common good. There is all a discussion on public service motivation here, which is there, but there is also um, we can also identify preferences for career and career development and things like that, which we found consistent with previous results in other research works, right? We are not talking here about, how can I say, I forgot the name in English, but when you have like a person that harms herself or himself for the common good, we are not talking about this case. We are talking about people that are rational, like not rational. I mean, that people that are like, they want to have good working conditions, right? They
Mhm.
want to have a good career path. They don't want to harm themselves, but they are strongly committed to promoting common good and
Mhm.
policies and achieving citizen needs, but these logics are coexisting. So
Mhm.
I think it would be something like this.
Yeah, that's great. And I just want to ask a little bit more because as you talk through this, um, you talk about kind of your interests matching pretty closely with Dr. Cohen's interest. And I'm just curious because something that I heard as a PhD student, and I still hear, right? It's about building networks. It's about reaching out to those scholars that can be mentors and can kind of help you build your network. Could you talk about that process of reaching out and building that collaboration? I think that would be incredibly valuable of kind of this background context of um, that relationship before even getting to the paper?
Great. I think this is a great question. So at that moment that we did the paper, I was a PhD candidate, and my advisor, Professor Gabriela Lota, she she's a person very well connected internationally with different scholars. She has this uh, attitudes of going out from her university and
Mhm.
engaging with a broad international network of scholars, and it was really nice because at a certain point Haifa University was looking for a researcher that would be willing to go there for 2 weeks to collaborate, just like an international collaboration. And then Professor Nissim Cohen asked Professor Gabriela Lota, if she had a person to indicate a student that would be willing to go there to engage in research collaborations. And then I was doing my PhD on this topic on policy entrepreneurship, and I immediately offered myself to go. Like I really would like to go. Um, so I would say that in my case, my advisor's network helped a lot because she enabled me to be in contact with different scholars from different university in various countries. I would say that there are different ways to follow this path of connecting and engaging in collaborations. One is, of course, as it was my case, like my advisor just helped me a lot. But I would say also other mechanisms. For instance, another thing that helped me significantly was to be a member of professional associations, professional academic associations. We have ASPA, APSA, and several professional academic associations, and this helps a lot. Sometimes they have programs for young career scholars. Sometimes they have like workshop weeks to talk about research, to talk about good practices in publishing or developing the research and strengthening connections among scholars and among young scholars. So as someone that studies networks, I strongly believe in the power of these networks, and I think that there are different ways to go in these networks, and one of them, for sure, I would highlight these professional associations and these academic associations in the different fields we have, and and also from professors in our universities. That I remembered that also I another opportunity that I had was during a course in the PhD program. Our final assignments were to submit a paper for the discipline, for the course, and then the professor of the course was interested in further, like improving the final assignment
Sure.
paper and convert it into a broader research project, which we then submitted to a journal and follow it the path of publication. So I think that when we are in the process of doing the PhD, I think that one thing that would benefit PhD students and candidates is to pay attention about the opportunities to engage in collaborations, even if it starts very small and simple, like a final paper assignment or like a collaboration for 2 weeks. But then it can scale up, and it can unfold in different research projects. And finally, another thing that I would highlight is, it's kind of like obvious, but I would highlight it anyway, the congress and the conferences that we can go, because sometimes you can get to know someone that you would never talk to if it was not the conference, right? So you can exchange ideas and you can build new new networks from these events, and I think it's very, very useful for us when we are in this moment of the PhD dissertation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think just there's a bunch of opportunities that come from different avenues, and being ready for them when they come is a big difference that I've seen. So as you were talking through all of those, I was like, yeah, yeah, each one. I totally agree. So that's wonderful. Um, as a bit of a transition here, I know you recently transitioned from a PhD candidate to a postdoc. And I'm curious if you, even a few years ago, would look back and give some advice to yourself as you're starting out your PhD or kind of moving through that PhD process.
Yes, I think that something that I would say to the younger Mariana would be to strongly engage with various types of both quantitative and qualitative research methods. I mean, I did this, but if I could go back in the past, I would have done even more, because I think that we should not limit ourselves uh, because of the method. Sometimes we have a research question that needs something more qualitative, and sometimes we need something that is more quantitative. And we know that there is a wide range of methods network analysis, uh, all the survey experiments or field experiments that we can do, participant observations, interviews, we know that's a lot. And all the content analysis and all the things that we can do now with artificial intelligence and all the technological resources that are available. So I think that it's a lot, and we must know how to navigate all these possibilities. And I think we should not limit ourselves depending on the method, because the research question matter and the method must follows what the research needs, right? So I would, if I could give this advice to the younger Mariana, it would be something like this: to strongly engage with the various types of methods we have. And another thing was something that I already said, but again, just to highlight, is to be aware of the different academic associations and remember to be part of these networks as soon as possible, because it matters a lot. It helps a lot.
Yeah, to follow up on your advice, I'm curious if you have thoughts about balance between um, having kind of a diverse toolbox of methods to like really get at the questions we want to ask, and the always looming pressure of finishing your PhD. I'm just curious if, yeah, if you have a thought about kind of the balance between that of getting out as quickly as possible, or kind of spending time really soaking everything up.
I think this is a trade-off, right?
Mhm.
And in this trade-off, I would say that it depends on the circumstances of the person. Depending on the program of the PhD program, the person is very well uh, valued, like in terms of, practical matters like resources and everything. So if the person has the conditions, to the conditions and the time to go deeper in methods and everything, I would say to prioritize this. But it depends on the situation. You have PhD programs in other countries or other institutions that sometimes you don't have all the resources that you deserve or that you need. So it depends on the situation. I would say that it's something to us to strategically assess depending on the institutional context.
Mhm.
But by the way, I think that if we manage to follow the path that we planned for the PhD, it's always possible to sometimes make other research works in parallel, and this includes training in methods. I really believe that training in methods is something that we can do in parallel with the research work, even if it's like, I don't know, 15 minutes a day, but we can like have a certain methodological topic on our radar, under our radar, and try to, conciliate to go together with these things. It's, for me, I think it's always possible, but I know that at a certain point, when the deadline comes, we just need to get it done. So it takes some there is a challenge in balancing things, but I think this balance is very worthwhile.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I also kind of another form of balance. You're talking about working in parallel. Before we started recording, you informed me that this actually isn't part of your dissertation, right? So, could you just talk a little bit about that balance that you see between focusing in on your dissertation, but also picking up the opportunities as they come along, and uh, what value you see in it?
Great. I think that, so during the years of the PhD, really engaged with other projects, parallel projects. Of course, again, there is a trade-off because we are talking about less time for your own research, and we are talking about managing time, which is something very hard for me because in my head I always, like stay positive and think that everything will goes well and I will have time for everything. But then reality comes and it's not like this, and then you have to survive and deliver everything that you promised that you will deliver. So there is a huge challenge there, and I think that giving considering the challenge that it is that there is embedded in the situation, I think that it was great for me to be in other research projects because I learned a lot from experienced scholars, and particularly for me, I had this opportunity to, for instance, okay, how do we frame a paper? How do we, organize, structure an article? And as I did it in the other research works, it was easier for me for my PhD dissertation because I organized it in 3 essay articles.
Mhm.
And so it was easier for me when I had to do this in the PhD thesis because I had it done before in other research. So it helped me a lot to organize the work and to say to myself, okay, now you just have to do what you have done before with the other works, but now it's your own work, right? So it was great for me, this opportunity. And also another positive thing that I guess it also occurred was
Mhm.
that you get to know other research scholars. You get to know other people that are doing other forms of research work, which is also interesting for you to learn with, to get more experience, and so it's always a rich process. I would say that the only, how can I say, the only challenge of this is to how to manage the time and how to. So something that helped me was to have a how can I say, kind of life like a schedule that
Sure.
I tried to protect my schedule during the days, like working on blocks, like, oh, okay, this is Thursday, I will work, I don't know, like 3 hours on this project, and the other remaining 4 hours, they are for my project. I will
Mhm.
not let the other project go in
Yeah.
behind of my project, because otherwise I will harm myself, my own work. And the PhD thesis only me can work. I cannot ask another person to do it. So I had to struggle with this schedule to really, really commit to the things that I needed to deliver. So this was the challenging part. But I think that in the end, it was really nice to had these parallel projects because it helped me a lot and I learned a lot from them. So it was positive despite the time challenge.
There's always more projects than there's time for, isn't there? Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, as we come up on the hour here, I just want to say thank you, Mariana, to spending some time with us and chatting with us. And before I conclude, I just want to ask if there's any concluding thoughts that you have that you'd like to kind of share about your experience or just advice more broadly.
No, I just, of course, I thank you for the opportunity to discuss and to be here talking about research work. It's really nice. As a final thought, I would just highlight that one, to be cautious about the interpretations of the findings. We are talking about a relationship of associations. We are not talking about a causal relation. And two, because of this first point, we have a research agenda, like that is there about so we have future
Mhm.
opportunities to extend this work, and maybe using, for instance, mixed methods approach, or relying on survey experiments and all the methods that we have to extend this type of analysis, which has like several topics waiting us there to work on it.
Yeah, I definitely feel like, given our conversation here and our kind of last few minutes, that your voice really came out in that last paragraph of future research. That conversation of different ways to asking and getting at these questions is certainly highlighted in that paper as well. So again, I just want to say thank you, Mariana, for coming and talking with us. Again, for those that are listening, just a reminder to rate, review, and subscribe. Additionally, follow Art of Science Pod on Twitter. And thank you both to the Policy Studies Journal and the Center for Policy Design and Governance at Syracuse University, for which this podcast is a joint initiative. And with that, again, thank you, and we'll see you next quarter.
Thank you so much. It was really nice.
Wonderful. Thanks.